you for your question. He quotes chapter 4, verse 60 of the Holy Quran, which, and I read the translation here, which says, "O ye who believe, obey Allah and obey His Messenger and those who are in authority amongst you." Who are the people in authority? And he talks of who are the ulil amrin minkum. Jahangir Saab, if I could start with you. It's something which is used quite liberally. It's talked about that the issue of obedience in Islam and the issue of obedience to authority in particular is also applies, for example, to governments and ensuring that you listen and observe laws and respect laws. But is it all-encompassing? Who does it include?
Well, that's a very good question. As you said, obedience is something very, very important in Islam. And whether it's obedience to Allah's commandments or the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's commandments, which are based on Allah's commandments, or whether it applies to secular government or people who are in authority, Islam teaches obedience, because Islam is there to bring peace, and to bring peace we have to move away from anarchy.
Indeed.
So that's very important. But then the question will arise whether this ulil amri minkum means only those who are in authority from among the Muslims, so they have to be Muslims themselves, or can it be applied in a wider sense to non-Muslims who are ruling over Muslims as well? Mm-hmm. And we'll find that, especially these days, many Muslims who have, those Muslims who have a much narrower interpretation of Islam, we might say, or a harsher interpretation, they would be categorical and say that we are not supposed to obey those among us in authority who are not among us really, who are not really Muslim.
Who are not Muslims.
Yes.
Okay.
So if we happen to find ourselves, they say, in a certain set of circumstances where the ruler of the land is not a Muslim, we are not bound in all cases to obey that person. What they're doing in effect is they're inviting to anarchy.
Indeed.
And that is completely against the spirit of Islam. Now, do we find any references to the fact that people other than Muslims could be considered as part of us in any sense? Mm-hmm. In the history of Islam? Well, happily we do. Mm-hmm. In, for example, the case of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself, when he was chosen as the ruler of Medina, he was democratically chosen by the idolaters among the Arabs in Medina, mm-hmm. and the Jews of Medina, and the Muslims of Medina. They all unanimously, or almost unanimously, chose him as their leader. He became the leader. Then he drafted a constitution which is often said to be the first constitution ever drafted in the world, which is the Constitution of Medina. Mm-hmm. And it specifically says in that the Jews and the Muslims will form a ummah wahida, which means one nation. And with the clause that and the Jews will nevertheless be able to follow their own religion, and the Muslims will be able to follow theirs, without any interference of the state in that. But they are called one nation. So therefore, if any of them is chosen as leader, obviously that will be one of among them, of the nation. And so we find that even though these Muslims today, the kind of harsher, Muslims, will preach this, kind of a measure of anarchy in a sense, that they say that we're not bound to follow non-Muslims if they happen to be ruling us. Nevertheless, when they do come to countries, for example, in the West in particular, they do follow the government, and they're bound to do so. They don't really have a choice in the matter. Mm-hmm. And in practice, they do follow them. They do obey them to a large degree. So it's a bit disingenuous to say that we're not supposed to follow them, but then to follow them anyway. Basically, Islam is saying that you have to follow whoever is in authority. It does not say from among the Muslims. It says from among you. Although it is addressing the O ye who believe, that does not mean that it only applies to them. Allah is telling those who believe in particular that if you are believers in truth, then you have to obey those who are in authority among you, whoever they may be. That's not said by Allah at all. So in effect, it means anybody who is in authority. They deserve our respect, they deserve our obedience, and we have to follow their laws. That's very important. Having said that, there's just one little clause which may be added here, and it is that if in any government at all, laws are started to be passed which go clearly against our religious obligations, clearly. For example, a blatant one would be, you don't have the right to pray anymore. Mm-hmm. in that case we would not obey that. We would continue to pray, even if we had to pay a very heavy price for that, or be punished, or even put to death. And Ahmadis have indeed shown that.
Just on that point,
yes.
though, is rebellion ever permitted as such? So could they rebel against that particular law?
Well,
or is
it depends what you mean by rebellion. If you mean like an armed rebellion in the sense that you're going to go out and create disorder on the streets, obviously not. We would say that, fair enough, if this is your law, we are not going to follow it. If you're going to punish us, then we'll accept whatever punishment you'll give. But Muslims are not supposed to go out and rebel against that kind of thing. On the other hand, if a government starts to persecute the believers of any faith, then those people at some point, they will have the right to defend their lives at least. That they will do. But from there to go on to an open armed rebellion, that's quite a step. And Islam does not call for that.
Jazakallah. Dr. Saab, just as a quick point on this as well, I think Jahangir Saab makes some very particular and refined points as well about the issue of, we touched on anarchy. Yet there is an irony in all of this as well. The very Muslims that Jahangir Saab has sort of referred to, who call upon this kind of, not just civil disobedience, but it's much wider than that. It's a rejection of the laws that govern them. And our country here in the United Kingdom is probably experiencing something of that, where there's this real clamber in some Muslim quarters for Sharia law to be imposed, and because we do not like to live in an Islamic state, then the state cannot be observed. I mean, that's totally against the grain, it's totally against Islam and everything Islam teaches. Indeed, many Western countries are great examples of religious freedoms, human rights freedoms, and where you're allowed not just to practice, profess, but actually propagate your religion quite openly, very openly indeed, which perhaps they're not allowed to do in certain Islamic republics.
Absolutely. I mean, as Jahangir Saab has revisely pointed out, that ulil amr minkum, from this is properly constituted under law, a government that is properly constituted under law and enacts these, then we have to abide by those laws. And living here in the UK, we certainly have more rights to profess and propagate our law, which we don't have in other countries. But as Ahmadis who are deprived of these rights, then the answer to that is steadfastness, and not to come out in protests that would cause anarchy and cause disorder in the land. Islam is all for promoting peace. So therefore, wherever we are, this is what we always see, is that Ahmadis will always remain steadfast, will remain loyal, and will remain faithful to the properly constituted government of the time that we have here, for instance.
And ultimately